the one area of skills where graduates and apprentices, and this is specific to the UK, are consistently falling down on expectations between where they are on day one and where employers expect them to be, is on this category of seeing the bigger picture, which is commercial awareness, economic understanding, political awareness as well. Fascinating time to be kind of involved in the future of work. You kind of go through a progression where you're like little by little moving up that career ladder. And you get to a certain level at senior management where it's kind of like, you get to a point where it's like, if you want to go any further, it's like, surprise, there's a whole bunch of other skills that we actually expect you to be able to deliver. But, we haven't actually been teaching you how to build those up. But what we're not teaching them is how to effectively build a business case for themselves. Networking efficiently and effectively across your organization so that you've got sponsors in different parts of the business. Understanding the dynamics of how the business runs in practice so that you can be able to spot opportunities, make connections between different parts of the puzzle that are all then able to operate effectively.
Welcome to the Social Impact Journal. My name is Jack Farron. As always, I'm your host, and this is the podcast where I talk to changemakers around the world driving social impact. This week, I'm with Carla Hoppe. She is the founder of Wealthbrite and on a mission to build the next generation of leaders around the world. If you do enjoy the episode, please do share it with your colleagues and friends and make sure to sign up to our new newsletter. Carla, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know we met a few weeks ago in London, and I thought as soon as I met you, let's get Carla on the Social Impact Journal and talk about some of the fantastic work that you're doing.
Thanks, Jack. It's great to be here. And really excited to kind of explore our conversation and our topic all around what does the next generation of leadership look like?
Awesome. So I think gone are the days that you study, get a job, salary increases every year and have a nice pension at the end. I think, the world has changed. And how have you seen the workplace changing in, not just the last decade, but even in the last few years?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. Actually, it makes me feel quite old now as an elder millennial, because I still probably was in that group of people who went to school, got my pathway into the workplace. And I did spend a very long time at my first employer, PwC, before I then shifted into another place in the same industry, before now starting my own entrepreneurial journey. And what's remarkable about the shift that's happening in the world of work is in what is a relatively short space of time, really only the last 5 years, where we've just seen that kind of pathway being ripped up. And now, we can debate whether or not it was already starting to happen beforehand. I think people will say, oh, well, you've heard about squiggly careers, people having this kind of like mixed spaghetti-like pathway throughout their career where they'd hop from one thing to another. But I think it's become amplified as a result of lockdown, COVID-19. I think also the cost of living crisis has had an impact on kind of people's own reflections about their need to shore up funds in having side hustles or multiple streams of income to kind of just make ends meet, right? So it's a really big shift. And I think we're in a really interesting time. I think it's a fascinating time to be kind of involved in the future of work. Because now is the time where businesses are really having to look inside themselves and go, well, what do we want to be now? And what role do we have to play in, not just providing a place where people come to work, learn skills and earn a paycheck. What else are we doing to support our people? And I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, and you're on the front line of this stuff, especially with young people, graduates. When you speak to those individuals, how do they actually view the workplace right now?
I think it's interesting. On the one hand, I see so much enthusiasm and excitement. I think Gen Z are really very passionate. Um, and I think they see themselves as having a lot of opportunity, which is right. I actually don't think they're that different to how I felt when I was at
Mm,
their age. I
mm,
think every generation, as they cycle out of full time education and into the workplace, is kind of in that quite excited anticipation stage where there are a lot of opportunities on the one hand, and yet we've seen the negative impacts of things like COVID-19 and the cost of living crisis show up in really significantly higher levels of mental health illnesses in young people, a deep sense of anxiety around what they will do. So, and I think it's a sense when I talk to people, a sense of feeling overwhelmed, almost
mm.
that there's too much choice. And then the question becomes, well, what do I do? And how do I navigate it, right? My bit of the world is helping people build skills around good commercial and financial acumen. And it's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations recently with people who are either just about to enter the workforce or are already in at the beginning stages of their career. And they say, when I was applying for jobs, I didn't even know like the salary that might or might not have been listed on that job description. Is it enough to live on? I don't
Mm,
know. I'm going in blind. I don't really feel like I've got the skills to be able to assess whether or not, like on paper, that job looks great, right? But is the amount of money I'm going to get paid in and of itself sufficient to sustain me?
yeah.
And that's interesting because I think that this generation has unfortunately experienced quite a lot of difficult, challenging times in a very short and quite critical stage of their development,
Mm,
which has left them feeling a lot more uncertain about the world. So, on the one hand, they enjoy the sheer dynamism of having lots of opportunity and lots of things happening around them, but in their personal lives and in their careers, that's throwing up some questions
mm,
about, well, who or where do I look for guidelines on how to move forward?
yeah. So we'll talk a little bit later about how you're approaching this.
Yeah,
But how did you get into this type of work? You mentioned you were with PwC for a long time.
yeah.
So what brought you down this path?
Well, it's interesting because I've asked myself this quite a lot of times. Like, how did I end up here? Because if you'd asked me at the start of my career, I trained as a lawyer. And I think if you'd asked 20-something-year-old Carla what she wanted to do when she got to the end of her career, she'd be like, oh, be a partner in a law firm, clearly.
Yeah.
So far from the truth. Um, and I think really what I did actually do an exercise, which I really recommend people to do at any stage of their career, where I kind of I stopped, when I left my last job, I kind of did a bit of reflection and said, what are the things in my career which have been the real highlights
Mm,
and also where were the lowlights? But focusing on the highlights, what were the themes in those experiences that stood out to me? And I think something that really became very apparent was actually all those stages in my career where I'd felt really energized and truly like I was, it sounds a bit twee, but like living my why or my values. I felt in alignment with those
mm,
things. I was playing a role where I was either an educator role or that I was actually doing something where I was straddling two worlds, but playing translator. So I would
mm,
often be doing work where, I, in my corporate professional job, was working, for example, working with the charity and going in to help them with their
yeah.
strategy or their planning, and actually being able to um, explain the complexities of the universe that I'd come from in a way that actually made sense to people to
Mm,
help them be able to upskill, but then also to do something with that knowledge, not just to upskill for upskilling's sake, but
yeah.
just actually practically apply it. And that's the stuff that really got me going. And I thought, well, and actually as well as that, I looked back at some of the programs like coaching and leadership programs that I'd been really fortunate enough to be put on throughout my career. And I noticed that this theme kept coming up, which was, I think it goes to some of the many different types of tests you can take about
Yeah.
what your strengths and weaknesses are. But there was also like an exercise about what were your core values, and I think mine were along the lines of like lifelong learning was a big part of that. That was
Mm.
one of the themes that came out strongly in all of the times that I did this. So I guess I kind of basically got to a situation where I thought, well, okay, well, if I don't try this now and I don't try and lock into what I know has made me happiest
Yeah.
throughout my career, I'll regret it. Right.
Mm.
And I say that um, I was fortunate enough at the time when I made that decision to have, worked for nearly 15 years in the corporate space. I had saved up money to be able to make that decision to take a risk on
Mm.
myself. But I also had the backing of, family and friends who I knew would support me. So I was, I was, I was ready to take that leap. And maybe that was also with the benefit of age, being that I am almost 40. Um, and I guess I got to the conclusion, well, hey, now's the time. Because what I didn't want to do was end up in places where I've seen others, which is, looking down the barrel of another 20 years
Mm.
in a role or in a job, which was kind of sucking the life out of me, right?
Mm.
So I was kind of going, right, well, I'm not having that, so let's go over here. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's how we ended up here.
What was the work? What was the first week like when you left the corporate role and it was like, right, I'm an entrepreneur?
Well, it didn't happen quite so quickly as that.
Oh,
So I actually spent about a year ideating on what
okay.
Wealthbrite could be. I was working part-time
Mm.
consulting, and I continued to consult part-time whilst I built the foundations of
Okay.
Wealthbrite for another 2 years. So I've only been full-time in the business for we're coming up to a year, almost the anniversary.
Yeah.
So I was deliberately slow in my process, both to kind of give myself the time and space to kind of figure out what actually is this problem
Mm.
that I'm trying to tackle and where are the solutions that could make sense. But then also to say, to be real about it, to pay the bills, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because, jumping in first, both feet in, all in, wasn't quite within my means.
Mm.
But also I wanted to keep my hand close to like what's happening in businesses because
Yeah.
my company Wealthbrite works with businesses, so I felt it was quite important for me to actually
Mm.
like keep my hand in. So I kind of had a frontline view of what's going on in the changing future of the
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah. So on that area, the changing future, you
Mm.
know, in terms of the next generation of leaders,
Mm.
where are we at right now in terms of, in terms of how you think skill sets are being, skills being delivered by businesses to early talent? Are we prepared for the next generation of leaders to come in?
Well, I'm probably not qualified to speak to all the possible iterations of what leadership could look like. But if I talk from my personal experience and what I'm seeing now with Wealthbrite, and I think about how traditional training programs have kind of operated particularly in large corporate environments, is that there's been a fairly linear path, right? Whereby you come in, you're onboarded, you go through a traditional classroom-based style learning event.
Mm.
And the primary focus of that training is to deliver technical skills so that you can do the job you've been hired to do.
Yep.
And no doubt about it, that has to be the priority, right? You've got to learn the fundamental graft of whatever it is that you've kind of applied for and been successful in getting a job for. But I think, what's interesting to me is I still hear in businesses that their sort of skills matrix that they're using still goes back to that sort of traditional like core technical skills. And then we're still using this what I describe as very lazy language around soft skills.
Mm.
I hate that phrase. Soft skills are not soft. Um, it kind of suggests in a way that like they're somehow ancillary or supplemental to core skills which are hard and technical focused. And
Mm.
my experience of high performing teams and of what makes a great leader in the workplace is actually it's those more nuanced skills around negotiation,
Yeah.
around people management, communication, networking effectively, understanding the language of money and finance, the ways of doing business that make a great leader. We used to kind of joke about it, and I'm sure there'll be a few people smiling if I say this, but some of the best leaders in the places that I have worked at were the worst when it came to the technical skills. It was an open joke, right? And it's because they were so far away from the day-to-day realities of what you might describe as the coal face of doing the job, right?
Yep.
And rightly so, because their job was to lead a business, and therefore actually the requirements to have that, day in, day out detailed technical knowledge was absolutely not their focus, right? And so it's interesting to me because in a kind of traditional career trajectory, and this is why, and I don't think this works anymore, by the way, is that you kind of go through a progression where you're like little by little moving up that career ladder, and you get to a certain level at senior management or senior manager, senior manager, depending on the classifications, where it's kind of like you get to a point where it's like, if you want to go any further, it's like, surprise, there's a whole bunch of other skills that we actually expect you to be able to deliver. But, we haven't actually been teaching you how to build those up, right?
Because they came initially and you got the technical skills just to do
Exactly.
the job, and then you get promoted.
And we're so focused on doing the technical side. And yes, we teach people about teamwork and building skills, and communication is in that soft skills bracket. But what we're not teaching them is how to effectively build a business case for themselves. Networking efficiently and effectively across your organization so that you've got sponsors in different parts of the business. Understanding the dynamics of how the business runs in practice so that you can be able to spot opportunities, make connections between different parts of the puzzle that are all then able to operate effectively. Being able to cross-sell or spot selling opportunities if you're in that type of organization. And then actually at the most extreme level, when you get up to top leadership, you become a salesperson. That's your job. You have to be a rainmaker for your organization, right? And yet the vast majority of people who are brought into roles, unless you're in the sales team, are not being taught how to do that. And I always find this fascinating because, my own career, as I say, you get to a certain level and then all of a sudden that's the skill set that's kind of demanded. And what happens is if you haven't trained people from day one, or at least made them aware of that expectation, it favors certain personality types. It favors people who are potentially a little bit more outgoing in nature, who can put on the bravado and do that bit of sales pitch, even if they're kind of like flying by the seat of their pants, right? It favors the folk who are naturally set up in their ways of talking or working to, I'll chat to anyone. Chat to the person next to me on the bus, I do, and I get strange looks in London. But what it does, it puts an emphasis on a particular type of traits, which actually can be taught. These things can be taught. But if you don't teach them, what's ending up is this disparity in experiences is then showing itself at the later stages of the career game. And I have an inkling, yet to be fully fleshed out I have an inkling. We got to look at the data on this, but I have an inkling that some of the reasons why we're not seeing more diverse talent get to the top in their organizations is because sometimes they don't have the same fluency in the language of how business really works in practice, and they're not being taught it from day one.
So if that is your inkling, then I guess Wealthbrite is your vehicle to do something about it.
Yeah, and where does my inkling come from? Some statistics for you. I find it interesting that the one area of skills where graduates and apprentices, and this is specific to the UK, are consistently falling down on expectations between where they are on day one and where employers expect them to be is on this category of seeing the bigger picture, which is commercial awareness, economic understanding, and political awareness as well. So, we know that businesses are expecting a higher level of understanding on day one than what they're getting. And the other side of the sort of data point that I'm interested in is that there's a high level of low literacy. That's a bad way of saying that. Financial literacy isn't great in the UK, right? So actually it's costing the UK economy £20 billion annually.
Wow.
And that data comes from the fact that poor financial literacy shows up in a myriad of ways, including absences from the workforce, low productivity, mental health illnesses, which all impact people's ability to be really, truly productive at work. And that's data that the CBI conducted to look at what was the true cost of not imparting this really critical financial acumen to people in the UK. So I'm looking at the puzzle saying, all right, well, if great business leaders have this wealth of knowledge when it comes to the language of money and finance, and they understand how to do that connecting of the dots between what's happening outside in the world and what's happening in their organization, and we know that grads and apprentices are underperforming in this space against what businesses want, there's a skills shortage there, and we know the knock-on consequences. That's not just an individual knock-on consequence, that's a genuine top-line revenue loss to not only businesses day to day, but the economy as a whole. And we already know the UK is less productive as an economy than some of our counterparts, both in Europe and North America, right?
Yep.
So what if we could do something radical and solve that problem? What if we could actually fix it by teaching people this stuff on day one?
Okay, so let's say I've come off a grad scheme,
Yeah.
all right? And, I've just joined. And we're working with Wealthbrite
Yeah.
or the business that I just joined is working with Wealthbrite. What does that skills training program look for me
Yeah.
as the individual?
Yeah. Well, you would be invited to take part in our accelerator program.
Okay.
And the accelerator is a 12-week program, which is done, it's on our tech platform, because we know Gen Z particularly would love to do things in a multimodal context. We have, you would be taken through 3 specific series. So your first series would be your Rainmaker series.
Okay.
So we are going to build you up with some foundational knowledge about how to become a rainmaker at work. What that means in practice is you would start to learn, first of all, some of the fundamentals about different types of businesses. It's funny, I was at a networking event recently and I was chatting to a couple of young girls about, and these are aspiring professionals. And I was asking them where have you applied to work? What makes you pick those places? And they're like, I've heard they pay well, or I've heard they do this, or I've heard, absolutely. What was not being described was they're in a particular industry and I quite like what they're up to, right? Or there wasn't really an awareness of what does this business actually do, right? And then I tested this with a few other people that we've had in our community in a cohort. I said, when you apply for your jobs, what was in the order of things that you were concerned with? What were you looking for? And they were like, pay, job title, stuff that they give. And I was like, did you think about the industry? And they were like, well, only as regards to the type of job I was doing. And I was like, cool. Did you know or understand what that business actually does? How do they make money? And they were like, no. Was it important? No, not really. Which is interesting, right? Because actually from a business perspective, having your people understand how you actually make money is core to your ability to get them to be aligned to your commercial goals. So as part of our Rainmaker series, you'd actually start to learn about different business models in different industries. You'd also start to learn how to tell stories with financial data. So we're not trying to turn everybody into mini accountants, but you would be introduced to the concept of financial statements and what they are and what they represent. But then you get to play with a simulator. So we have an AI simulator in the program where you will be introduced to a company that we have created, made up, and you will follow it for 12 months. And then lots of different things will happen to it. And what those things are that happen to that business are based off of things that have actually happened to businesses in real life. So from real examples we can point to, but also critically, things that businesses that we've been talking to and working with to create this program tell us are either pain points for them or issues that have come up in the workplace that they wish their young people better understood.
Okay.
So you will be asked to respond to different questions and you have to write your own responses. So there's no yes, no, multiple choice quizzes, that kind of nonsense. You actually have to put your learning, it's contextualized learning based on stuff that is actually going to cross your desk, right? So this is like put your learning into practice immediately and make it something that's going to stick in your head that you can take back to your desk when you get to it, right? So that's the Rainmaker series. Then you go through the Wealth Builder series. And this
Okay.
is where you learn about, okay, cool, you've learned about how businesses make and manage their money. What does that mean for you? You and your take home pay. So we introduce you to things like, how can you be thinking about maximizing your take home pay? Introducing people to the concepts of budgeting, saving, and investing. We know that one of the most common questions asked by young people at the start of their career when it comes to personal finances is, what should I do when? Right? Nobody is there to give you a guide to go, hey, you've got your take home pay. This is how much you should be saving. This is how much you might want to think about putting into, long-term savings. Here's how you make a financial goal set. So we teach people that. We also explain to them like how to read a pay slip, because now everything's delivered electronically. People don't look at their pay slips, right?
Yep.
There's some weird statistic
I
out
remember
there.
when I was
Yeah, go for it.
my first job. Yeah, I could have done with that training.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. So yeah, again, showing my age, my pre PwC days, but I remember my first couple of jobs, like random jobs. I once worked in the admin team of a checkbook making factory. Yeah,
Okay.
checkbooks don't even exist anymore. But that's one of my jobs I had, and had to do like really embarrassing announcements on the tannoy, which people on the factory floor would take the piss out of me for. But I used to get my payslip literally handed to me, right, with the cash in the envelope. So I was kind of familiar with that kind of idea, and I remember reading the like little lines in it, and like fairly early on, like I was kind of interested in it because it was handed to me. But then as soon as I got into like my professional career, that kind of disappeared, and that practice or that habit of like looking kind of fell away. And whilst you don't necessarily need to be looking at your payslip every day, or perhaps not even every month, it's really valuable to understand the story that is actually told there. Why? Because if something goes wrong, it's your responsibility to fix it. And I think this is something people don't fully always understand, right? That because your employer, at least in the UK, handles the administration of paying taxes for you, it's almost like, well, someone else has done the job for me, right?
Yep.
But the truth of the matter is, if there's an error, if there's a mistake, if something has gone wrong somewhere along the line, it comes back to you as an individual. Your employer isn't allowed to talk to the tax authority. You've got to figure it out for yourself. So we educate people on that. And also, like, when might you be asked for your pay slips? Like, if you're applying for a mortgage and things like that. So why is it good to keep records? And then pensions, right? It's really fascinating area of learning about how to build wealth, because we conduct surveys with a lot of employees in the workforces that we kind of do business with, and we consistently ask the question: are you currently investing? I think the average is about 78% of people said no or don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, which tells me they don't understand that their pension is an investment.
Mm.
It's just like a word that has become so separated from the concept of investing that people aren't connecting with it. And, I think it's fantastic in the UK, we moved to a system of auto enrollment with pensions. So now more people are saving something. But sadly, the data is that if you're only saving the minimum, which is like 8% between you and your employer, you will not have enough to retire on.
Yep.
But people don't know this. And so there's a part of our education piece, which is to say, shout about the good thing that your employer has done. Like, hey, you've got this awesome pension. Like, and we work with employers to we can customize it to their particular circumstances. But then also just to get a bit of a reality check on, by the way, this is your responsibility. You need to think about it. And here's why, even if you're in your 20s, I know you ain't thinking about retiring anytime soon, but your future self will thank you if you take action now.
Absolutely.
So those are the two first ones. And then the glue that sticks it together is the Connector series.
Okay.
And that's another part of the program where really we're sort of introducing people to the concept of effective networking, right? And we've created a thing called the promotion playbook. And this is about embedding in early talent the practice and habits of capturing real time their achievements, feedback. Why? Because it's all part of then starting to think about how you as an individual articulate the value that you're bringing to your business. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and he was saying, yes, I don't think I could say that our early talent is afraid of asking for a pay rise or a promotion, but they don't always know how to explain the why. right?
Yeah.
And it's about tapping into that. Why should you get a promotion or a pay rise? Absolutely, people should be advocating for themselves, but it's about helping them connect the dots again between what they're doing day to day with what the bigger picture commercial goals of the business are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So thanks for kind of walking me through those 3 series of the accelerator, and thanks for your time today as well, sharing what it will take to build the skills of the next generation of leaders. Now, one question I asked to all of my guests is if you had your own social impact journal and
Mhm.
you could write one page, and that page is for someone that this year is graduating from university and heading into the workplace for the very first time, what would you write in that page for them to read?
That's a great question. I would write about the power of networking, but I would explain what I mean by that. I would explain that it's not about showing up to a networking event or a drinks event and feeling awkward or huddling in the corner with your friends. I would talk about the power of getting to know people who might be a bit further ahead of you in your career, not being afraid to ask, not being afraid to walk up to somebody and either ask for help or ask to get to know them. I was talking on another webinar recently about the power of mentorship. And I was saying how, and I think the same is true in a networking context. If you're nervous about approaching somebody, don't forget most people really enjoy talking about themselves. If you can start off with a little bit of flattery and explain why it is, explain. I think there's a couple of things, right? Explain why it is you want to get to know that person. Do a bit of research about them. Find out who they are as an individual. It's not transactional. Really great networking is about nurturing relationships.
Mm,
And it's about thinking long term, right? It's really interesting to me that, as myself, as a 20-something trainee solicitor, I had no idea that one of the clients that I met in my first year on one of my first jobs, I still talk to her today, right? And that and and there has been years where we didn't speak, right? But then people come in and out of your life.
yeah.
And I think I would encourage people to think about how they can harness the power of a network to learn from people, stay curious, always be um, open to learning, and open to learning from places and people that you might not expect it from. That would be my page.
Carla, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me, Jack.
Thanks so much for watching this week's episode. If you did enjoy it, please share with your colleagues and friends and make sure to subscribe or follow to all of our channels. See you next Monday for the next episode of the Social Impact Journal.